Chapter 18. Alexei Turbin started to die during the afternoon of the 22nd of December. The day was snowy and overcast, and full of the spirit of the imminent arrival of Christmas. This was reflected above all in the shine of the parquet floor in the sitting room, the result of the combined efforts of Anyuta, Nikolka, and Laryosik moving quietly about the room the day before. There was a similar spirit of Christmas in the holders of the icon lamps, which Anyuta had polished with her own hands. And finally, there was the smell of pine needles, and a radiant display of greenery in the corner by the passage from Faust, lying seemingly forever forgotten above the open piano keys. "Please, I beg you, for my sister's sake." Moving a little unsteadily, Yelena had come out of Alexei's room at about midday, and had gone quietly through the sitting room, where Karas, Mishlaevsky, and Laryosik were sitting in complete silence. They all remained perfectly still, avoiding looking at her face as she walked through. Yelena went into her own room and closed the door, the heavy curtain falling into place and lying still. Mishlaevsky stirred. "So," he said in a hoarse whisper, "the commander did a good job, except that he didn't do so well by Alyosha." Karas and Laryosik had nothing to add to this. Laryosik blinked, dark violet shadows lining his cheeks. "Oh, damn it," Mishlaevsky added. He stood up and, swaying from side to side, made his way to the door. Then he stopped in indecision and gestured in the direction of Yelena's door. "Listen, chaps, why don't you keep an eye on her? Otherwise, maybe—" He shifted from one foot to the other and went into the library, where the sound of his footsteps died down. A little while later, his voice could be heard again, together with some strangely plaintive sounds emanating from Nikolka's room. "She's in tears, Nikol," Laryosik whispered with a despairing sigh. He tiptoed up to Yelena's door and bent down to the keyhole, but was unable to see anything. He glanced round helplessly at Karas, making questioning gestures. Karas went up to the door, hesitated for a moment, and then tapped quietly on the door with his fingernail. "Yelena Vasilievna? Yelena Vasilievna?" he said quietly. "Don't worry, I'm all right." Yelena's muffled voice could be heard from the other side of the door. "But don't come in." Karas moved away from the door, as did Laryosik. They both returned to their places, to their chairs under the Sardam stove, and fell quiet. There was nothing that the Turbin family, or those closely connected to them, could do in Alexei's room. With the three men already there, the room was cramped enough as it was. One of them was the golden-eyed, bear-like figure. The second was the trim figure of a young, clean-shaven man, looking more like a guardsman than a doctor. And finally, the third was the grey-haired professor. It was his expert knowledge that had revealed both to him and the other Turbins the unwelcome news as soon as he had appeared on the 16th of December. Realizing at once what was wrong, he had said there and then that Alexei had typhus. And straight away, the bullet wound under the left shoulder had become less significant. It was he who an hour ago had gone out with Yelena into the sitting room where, in answer to her persistent questioning, reflected not just in what she said but in the expression of her dry eyes and cracked lips, he had told her that there was little hope, adding, as he looked directly into Yelena's eyes with his own experienced and therefore all-pitying eyes, very little hope. Everyone, including Yelena, knew very well what that meant, that there was no hope at all, and that, therefore, Alexei was dying. After this, Yelena had gone into Alexei's bedroom and stood there for a long time looking at his face, and it was then that she realized that there was indeed no hope. She didn't need the expertise of the kind, grey-haired old professor to tell her that Alexei was clearly dying. He lay there, still in a fever, but the fever was fitful, seemingly liable to disappear at any moment. His face was already beginning to take on a strangely waxen sheen, and the shape of his nose was changing, becoming thinner, with the especially striking curved part exhibiting an aura of hopelessness. Yelena's feet grew cold standing there, and for a moment she was overcome by the sense of depression and gloom pervading the purulent, camphor-ridden air in the room. But this soon passed. Something sank in Alexei's chest like a stone, and he started to whistle as he breathed in, trying to force a stream of clammy air into his lungs. He had long ago fallen unconscious, and he was totally unaware of what was going on around him. For a little while, Yelena stood there, looking at him. Then the professor touched her hand and whispered, "You go, Yelena Vasilievna. We can do everything here now." Yelena obediently left the room, but the professor in fact didn't really do anything other than to take off Alexei's gown, wipe his hands with balls of moist cotton wool, and look once more at his face. The folds of his lips and nose were beginning to take on a bluish tinge. "It's hopeless," the professor said, speaking very quietly into the ear of his clean-shaven colleague. "You stay here by his side, Dr. Brodovich." "Shall I give him camphor?" Brodovich asked in a whisper. Yes. "By injection?" "No." The grey-haired professor thought for a moment, looking out of the window. "Give him 3 grams immediately, and then more frequently thereafter." After another moment's thought, he added, "Telephone me at my clinic in case things come to a head." As the professor whispered this, he took great care to ensure that Alexei, even through the fog of delirium, couldn't hear what he was saying. "And in any event, if nothing has happened, I'll come immediately when I've finished my lecture." Every year, for as long as the Turbins could remember, the icon lamps had been lit at dusk on the 24th of December, and later that evening the sitting room had begun to bask in the warm glow of the twinkling lights on the green fir-tree branches. But now, this time, the treacherous bullet wound and the wheezing typhus had thrown everything into confusion, bringing everything forward, including the lighting of the icon lamps. Closing the door into the dining room, Yelena went up to her bedside table, took out some matches, stood on a chair, and lit the light in the heavy icon lamp hanging on a chain in front of the large-framed icon. The flame flared up brightly, turning the halo above the dark head of the Virgin Mary into gold, and her eyes adopted a welcoming expression. The head, inclined to one side, looked down on Yelena. Outside, through the 2 square frames of the windows, it was a white, soundless December day, and the flickering tongue of flame in the corner of the room created a sense of the approaching festival. Yelena climbed down from the chair, threw her shawl off her shoulders, and went down on her knees. She rolled back the edge of the carpet to reveal an open space of gleaming parquet flooring, and silently bowed down to the ground. Mikhail walked through the dining room, followed by Nikolka, his eyelids puffy from tears. They stood in Alexei's room for a moment, and then returned to the dining room, where Nikolka said to the others, with a deep intake of breath, "He's dying." "Do you think we should call a priest?" Mikhail asked. "What do you think, Nikol? What if he should... without confession?" "We need to tell Lena first," Nikolka answered anxiously. "We can't do it without her, and anyway, she might not be able to cope with it." "But what does the doctor say?" asked Karas. "What is there to say?" Mikhail mumbled. "There's nothing more to be said." They spent a long time whispering anxiously among themselves, the pale-faced, confused Lariosic sighing audibly the whole time. Once again they called in to see Dr. Brodovich. He glanced out into the hallway, lit a cigarette, and whispered that it was the final death agony, and that of course it would be possible to summon a priest. He didn't mind, since the sick man was unconscious, and therefore it couldn't do any harm. Silent confession. They continued whispering among themselves, but without deciding whether to summon a priest. They knocked on Yelena's door, but she answered them through the door in a muffled voice. "Leave me for a bit. I'll come out in a minute." So they went away again. From her kneeling position, Yelena looked up mistrustfully at the jagged halo crowning the dark face with the clear eyes, and, stretching out her arms, whispered, "You have sent us too much grief all at once, Holy Mother of God. In the space of just 1 year you have destroyed a family. What for? You have taken our mother away from us, and I no longer have a husband. He's gone forever. That I can understand only too clearly. But now you are taking our eldest away. What for? How will Nicol and I manage alone, just the two of us? Just look around and see what's happening to us. Just look. Holy Mother of God, please, I beg you, take pity on us. All right, we might certainly be bad people, but why are you punishing us in this way? She bowed down again, eagerly pressing her forehead to the floor. Then she crossed herself, and stretching out her arms, started to pray once more. In you alone is there hope, Virgin Mother, in you alone. Pray for us to your Son. Pray to the Lord God that he send us a miracle. Yelena's whispering became more and more passionate. At times she stumbled over words, but her prayers continued in an unbroken stream. She prostrated herself on the floor with greater and greater frequency, tossing her head to sweep back the lock of hair that escaped from her comb and fell into her eyes. As the daylight faded in the square frames of the windows, the white falcon, too, disappeared, and the tinkling of the gavotte, as the clock struck 3, went unnoticed. Also completely unheard was the appearance of the one to whom Yelena had been praying through the intercession of the dark Virgin Mary. There he was, standing barefoot by the open tomb, risen and merciful. Yelena's breast expanded, a red blush suffused her cheeks, and her eyes, brimming over with dry, tearless weeping, were filled with light. She bowed down, pressing her forehead and cheek against the floor, and then, reaching out with all her soul, she moved as fast as she could to the icon lamp, no longer aware of the hard floor beneath her knees. The light of the lamp swelled up, and the dark face, framed by the halo, clearly came to life as the Virgin's eyes drew from Yelena fresh streams of more and more words. Outside in the street, as well as within the rest of the apartment, there was total silence, and the daylight was disappearing with incredible speed as another vision arose within the room. A heavenly vault filled with a hard, glassy light, strangely unfamiliar red and yellow sandy outcrops, olive trees, and the heart of a temple filled with cold and a dark, centuries-old silence. Holy Mother of God, Yelena whispered in the glow of the lamp, pray to him. There he is. What would it cost you? Have mercy on us. Have mercy. Your days, your festival are fast approaching. Alexei perhaps will still be able to do good in the world, and I will pray to you to forgive us our sins. I agree that Sergei should not return. If you have taken him from me, then so be it, but please don't punish us with Alexei's death. We are all guilty of bloodshed, but please don't punish us in this way. Please don't. He is here. Your son. The lamp started to flicker, and one long ray of light reached out towards Yelena's eyes. Then, as she looked at the Virgin Mary's face framed by its golden coif, she watched in bewilderment as the lips parted and the eyes adopted a preternatural expression. Her heart burst with such a feeling of terror and such a rush of intoxicated joy that she fell to the floor, this time without rising. The alarm spread throughout the apartment like a dry wind as somebody ran on tiptoe through the dining room. Someone else tapped on Yelena's door, whispering, "Yelena! Yelena!" Wiping her cold, clammy forehead with the back of her hand and tossing back the curl of hair from her eyes, Yelena got up from the floor, no longer looking at the shining icon in the corner, but blankly straight ahead of her, like some wild person. Then she went to the door with a heart that had turned into steel. Without waiting for permission, the door crashed open of its own accord to reveal Nikolka standing framed by the heavy curtain. He looked at her with horror-struck eyes. He was gasping for breath. "Yelena, you have to... Don't worry, please, don't worry. Please come. It seems..." Dr. Alexei Turbin, as waxen-looking as a broken, crumpled candle in someone's sweaty hands, lay there, his sharp chin pointing towards the ceiling, his bony hands with their unclipped fingernails protruding from under the blanket. His body was swimming in clammy sweat, and his glistening, desiccated chest could be seen rising and falling under his shirt. Then his head dropped, and he buried his chin in his chest. His lips parted to reveal his yellowing teeth, and he half opened his eyes. The expression in his eyes was still partly concealed by a quivering, ragged curtain of fog and delirium, but here and there patches of light could be glimpsed through the darkness. Then, in an extremely weak, thin and hoarse voice, he said, "It's the crisis, Brodovich. Will I pull through this? Ah." The lamp that Karas was holding in his shaking hands illuminated the sunken bed and the crumpled folds of the sheets. With a hand that was not entirely steady, the clean-shaven doctor grasped a piece of flesh on Alexei's arm and inserted a little needle. Small beads of sweat had formed on the doctor's forehead. He was agitated and shaken. Chapter 19. Petura. His sojourn in the city had lasted for 47 days. The January of 1919, icebound and powdered with snow, had flown past the Turbins, and now February had erupted in the form of a blizzard. On the 2nd of February, a dark figure with a shaven head covered by a black silk cap moved through the Turbins' apartment. This was Alexei Turbin himself, risen from the dead. He had changed considerably. 2 deep lines had appeared on his face, at the corners of his mouth, seemingly forever. His complexion was waxen, and his eyes were shadowed and sunken, with a permanently gloomy and unsmiling expression. Just as 47 days previously, Alexei stood in the sitting-room, his face pressed against the window, listening. And just as then, when he had looked out of the window and seen the snow falling and lights blazing in the sky as in an opera, he could hear the distant, muffled sound of gunfire. Grimacing painfully, he leant his full weight on his stick and looked out onto the street. He noticed that by some magic the days had got longer and that there was more light outside, despite the raging blizzard that was sending millions of snowflakes cascading through the air. Under the silk cap, his head was beset with thoughts, grim and cheerless, but always lucid. His head seemed to him to be a light and empty vessel, as if it were some alien box sitting on his shoulders, so that these thoughts appeared to be coming from somewhere outside him, in a sequence that they themselves had determined. He was quite happy to be alone, standing looking out of the window. Petura, he thought. By no later than tonight it will all be over, and Petura will have gone. But was he here at all? Or have I dreamt it all? I don't know. Impossible to prove one way or the other. I like Lariosik very much. He doesn't get in our way as a family at all. In fact, we need him here. I need to thank him for taking such care of me. But what about Chervinsky? God knows. It's never easy with women. Yelena's absolutely bound to get involved with him. But what's so good about him apart from his voice? Yes, he has a marvelous voice, but surely when all's said and done it's possible to listen to someone's voice without getting married to them, isn't it? But in any case it doesn't matter. So what does matter then? Yes, it was Chervinsky who was saying that they have red stars on their fur caps. I suppose all hell will probably break loose in the city, won't it? Yes, very probably. So, later tonight. The troop transports are probably already moving along the streets. Nevertheless, I'm going. I'll go in the daytime and I'll take... Ring! Grab him! I'm a murderer. No, I'm not. I fired at someone in the heat of battle, or maybe I just wounded him. Who does she live with? Where is her husband? Ring! Malyshev. Where is he now? Disappeared off the face of the earth. And what about Maxim? And Alexander I? As all these thoughts were streaming through his head, he was interrupted by the doorbell. Everybody had gone into the city, hastily completing their items of business while it was still light, and there was nobody in the apartment except for Anyuta. "If that's a patient for me, Anyuta, show him in." "All right, Alexei Vasilievich." Somebody climbed the stairs behind Anyuta, took off his mohair coat in the hall, and went into the sitting room. "Please, come this way," Alexei said. A scrawny-looking young man with a yellowish face and wearing an army jacket got up from his chair. There was a glazed, concentrated look in his eyes. Alexei, now in his white doctor's gown, stood aside for him to pass and showed him through to his study. "Please, sit down. How can I help you?"
"I have syphilis,"
the visitor said in a hoarse voice, looking straight at Alexei with a gloomy expression. "Have you been having treatment?"
"Yes, I have, but it's been rather poor and slapdash. Not much help, really."
"Who sent you to me?"
"The priest at St. Nicholas the Good, Father Alexander."
"Who did you say?"
"Father Alexander."
"What? Do you know him?"
"I have been to him for confession, and talking with the saintly old man has brought me considerable spiritual relief," the visitor explained, looking out at the sky. "Treatment wasn't for me, or so I thought. God was punishing me for my terrible sins, and I had to endure it patiently, but the priest persuaded me that this was incorrect, and so I did as he told me."
Alexei made a thorough examination of the man's pupils, and then proceeded to test his reflexes. But the owner of the mohair coat's pupils turned out to be quite normal, just full of a dark melancholy. "So," Alexei said, laying down his hammer, "you're evidently a religious person."
"Yes, I think about God and pray to him day and night. He is my only refuge and comforter."
"Well, that's wonderful, of course," Alexei replied, looking his patient straight in the eye. "And I respect that. But this is my advice. While you are being treated, put such persistent thoughts about God to one side. It seems they're becoming something of an idée fixe with you, and in your condition that's harmful. You need fresh air, exercise, and sleep."
"I pray at night."
"No. You need to change that habit and reduce the time you spend praying. It will simply tire you out, and you need rest." The man submissively lowered his eyes. He undressed and waited naked for Alexei to examine him. "Have you taken cocaine?"
"Among all the other revolting habits I used to succumb to, yes, but not any more."
What if he's a crook? Alexei wondered. Perhaps he's having me on. Goodness only knows. I'll need to make sure that none of the fur coats in the hall have disappeared. Alexei took the hammer and drew a question mark on the man's chest with the handle. The white mark turned red. "You must stop getting carried away by questions of a religious nature, and in general you need to stop burdening yourself with all these oppressive thoughts. Please get dressed. Tomorrow I'll begin injecting you with mercury, and then in a week's time you'll have your first blood transfusion."
"All right, Doctor."
"And no cocaine, or alcohol, or women."
"I have given up women, and all poisons, and all nasty people," said the man, buttoning up his shirt. "The evil genius of my life, the precursor of the Antichrist, has gone to the city of the devil."
"My dear chap, please stop all that stuff," Alexei groaned. "Otherwise you'll find yourself in a psychiatric hospital. What is this Antichrist you're talking about?"
"I'm talking about his precursor, Mikhail Semyonovich Spoliansky, the man with the black sideburns and the eyes of a snake. He has gone to the kingdom of the Antichrist in Moscow to raise the alarm and to lead a host of fallen angels to this city to punish it for the sins of its inhabitants, just like Sodom and Gomorrah."
"By the fallen angels you mean the Bolsheviks, I suppose?"
"Well, I agree."
"Nonetheless, you must stop all that stuff. You will take bromide, 1 tablespoon 3 times a day."
"He may still be young, but he's as depraved as any 1,000-year-old devil. He incites women to debauchery and young men to commit sinful acts, and the trumpets of war of the legions of evil are already sounding, and above the fields the face of Satan can be seen behind them."
"Trotsky, you mean?"
"Yes, that is the name he has adopted. but his real name is Abaddon in Hebrew, and Apollyon in Greek, that is to say, the Destroyer.
Seriously, I'm telling you, if you don't stop all this, you'll need to look out. It's becoming a mania with you.
No, Doctor. I'm perfectly normal. How much do you charge for your sacred work?
Please, why do you keep on using this word sacred? I don't see anything particularly sacred in the work I do. I charge the usual fee for a course of treatment like everybody else. If you wish to become a patient of mine, you'll need to leave a deposit.
Very good.
The man unbuttoned his army jacket. Perhaps you don't have very much money, Alexei muttered, looking at the threadbare knees on the man's trousers. No, he's not a crook, he thought. Just deranged.
No, Doctor. The money can be found. You are bringing solace to mankind in your own way.
And sometimes with great success. Don't forget to take the bromide correctly.
But total solace, dear Doctor, will come only when we've arrived up there, the man said passionately, pointing towards the white ceiling. But just at this moment, a time of suffering is upon us, the like of which no one has ever seen before, and it will be with us very soon.
I am most grateful to you for that information. I have suffered enough already.
Oh no, Doctor, you mustn't talk too soon, the man muttered as he was putting on his mohair coat in the hall. For as it has been written, and the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became blood. Now where have I heard that before? Alexei wondered to himself. Oh yes, of course, when I had that heartfelt talk with the priest. And now they've found each other. That's wonderful. My sincere advice to you is to read the Book of Revelation less. I repeat, it's harmful. My very best wishes. 6 o'clock tomorrow, please. Anyuta, please show this gentleman out. Please accept this. I really would like the person who saved my life to have something to remember me by. This bracelet belonged to my late mother. But why? You don't need to do this. I don't want you to, said Yulia Rice, trying to push Alexei away, but he persisted and fastened the dark, heavy metal bracelet around her pale wrist. Yulia's hand, all of her indeed, now seemed even more beautiful than ever. The pink glow on her cheeks was visible, even in the semi-gloom. Unable to restrain himself any longer, Alexei put his right arm round Yulia, pulled her towards him, and kissed her several times on her cheek. As he was doing this, his weak hand dropped his stick, which clattered onto the floor by the legs of the table. "You must go," Yulia whispered. "It's time to go. There are troop transports on the streets already. Make sure you stay safe." "You are so dear to me," Alexei whispered. "May I come to see you again?" "Yes, please come." "Tell me, why are you alone, and whose is this photograph on the table, that dark-looking man with the sideburns?" "That's my cousin," she answered, lowering her eyes. "What is his surname?" "Why do you want to know?" "You saved my life. I just want to know." "I see. Because I saved your life, that means you have the right to know things. His name is Spolyansky." "Is he here?" "No, he's gone away. To Moscow. You're being very inquisitive." Something stirred deep within Alexei, and he stood there for a long time, looking at the black sideburns and dark eyes. An unpleasant thought gnawed away at him more persistently than any others, as he studied the forehead and lips of the chairman of the magnetic triolet. But he couldn't bring it into focus. Precursor. That unfortunate man in the mohair coat. What was it that was troubling him, gnawing away at him? What did it have to do with him, anyway? Fallen angels. Oh, it didn't matter. Just so long as he could come here again, to this strange, peaceful little house, with its portrait of the man with the gold epaulets. "You must go. It's time." "Nicole, is that you?" The brothers came face to face with each other on the lowest terrace of the mysterious garden by the other little house. Nikolka seemed somehow embarrassed, as if he'd been caught red-handed. "Ah, Alyosha, I've been to see the Naitours family," he explained, looking as if he had been caught on a fence trying to steal apples. "Well, that was kind of you. Is his mother still alive?" "Yes, and his sister too. You see, Alyosha, well, anyway." Alexei gave his brother a sideways glance and didn't subject him to any more questions. The brothers walked half the way home in silence. Then Alexei said, "It seems that Petura threw us together onto Maloprovalnaya Street, doesn't it, Nicole? Oh well, we'll be coming here quite a lot in that case. But who knows what will come of it all, eh?" Nikolka's attention was immediately engaged by this cryptic utterance. Taking his cue, he asked, "What about you, Alyosha? Have you been seeing someone too on Maloprovalnaya?" But Alexei merely mumbled a reply, and raising his coat collar, disappeared inside it. For the rest of the way home, he didn't say another word. On this important and historic day, everybody, Myshlaevsky, Karas, and Shavinsky, was having dinner at the Turbins. It was the first time they had all sat down together for a meal since Turbin had returned home wounded, and everything was as it usually was, with one exception. There were no gloomy-looking sultry roses on the table, since the shattered Marquis' confectionery shop no longer existed and had vanished into the unknown, to a place where, no doubt, Madame Anjou also lay at peace. And nobody sitting at the table was wearing epaulets, all epaulets having turned to dust and been blown away by the blizzard. Everybody was listening to Shavinsky, open-mouthed, even Anyuta, who was leaning against the door, having joined them from the kitchen. "What kind of stars?" Myshlaevsky asked morosely. "Small, in the form of hat badges, 5-pointed, Shavinsky answered, "on their fur caps. There's a whole mass of them coming, they say. In a word, they'll be here at midnight." "At midnight, you say? How can you be so precise?" But before Shavinsky had time to answer, there was a ring on the doorbell, and Vasilisa appeared. Bowing to the left and to the right, and shaking everyone's, particularly Karas's, hand warmly, Vasilisa went straight to the piano, his boots squeaking. With a beaming smile, Yelena held out her hand to him, and, with a peculiar little hop, he kissed it. "Well, I never," thought Nikolka. "Vasilisa seems to have become much nicer since that money was taken from him. Perhaps," he continued in philosophical vein, "money stops people from being nice. Take this room, for example. Nobody has any money, and everybody's nice." Vasilisa thanks them all most humbly, but he doesn't want any tea. Splendid, all splendid. Tee-hee. How snug it all is here, despite the appalling things going on. He thanks them all most humbly again, but no thank you. Vanda Mikhailovna's sister has come to stay with them from the country, and he has to go back downstairs very soon. He's come to give Yelena Vasilievna a letter, found just a minute ago in the letterbox by the front door. "Considered it my duty to bring it to you. My deepest respects to you all." With another little hop, Vasilisa took his leave. Yelena took the letter off to her bedroom. "Can it really be a letter from abroad? I know about such letters. As soon as you pick up the envelope, you know what's inside. And how did it get here? There's no post at all at the moment. Even letters sent from Zhytomyr to the city only get here if brought especially by someone. How stupid, how absurd everything's become in this country. After all, the trains are still running, so I wonder why letters can't travel the same way, and why they get lost. But this one got through. Don't worry, a letter like this will make it, will find the right address. Warsaw. But the handwriting isn't Talberg's. I don't like this. My heart's beating so fast." Although there was a shade on the lamp, everything suddenly became so unpleasant in Yelena's bedroom, as if someone had ripped the colourful silk off the shade, causing the harsh light to shine directly into her eyes, and creating a general sense of chaos. Her face changed, taking on the appearance of the ancient Virgin Mary in her fretted frame. Her lips were trembling, but forming into folds of contempt. Her mouth was twitching. Tearing the envelope, she took the sheet of grey, lined notepaper out and placed it in the pool of light. I have only just learnt that you have separated from your husband. The Ostromovs saw Sergei Ivanovich at the embassy. He was on his way to Paris, together with the Hertz family. They say he's getting married to Lydia Hertz. Strange how this chaos is affecting everything. I'm sorry you didn't leave the city as well. I'm sorry for all of you, trapped in the peasants' clutches. They seem to be saying in the newspapers here that Petliura is advancing on the city. We hope the Germans will stop him. Crashing and thumping through the walls and door, draped with the curtain portraying Louis XIV, Nikolka's march resounded mechanically in Yelena's head. Louis was smiling, one arm thrust out, holding his cane entwined with ribbons. Someone rapped on the door with the handle of a stick, and Alexei came in. Seeing his sister's expression, he made the same face and asked, "From Talberg?" Feeling ashamed and depressed, Yelena said nothing for a moment, but then suddenly she came to and pushed the sheet of notepaper across the table towards him. "From Olya, in Warsaw." He ran his eyes along the lines until the end, and then went back and read the opening again. "Dear Lenotchka, I don't know if this will reach you." Many different colours were reflected on his face. The general shade was saffron. His cheekbones were pinkish, and his eyes were at first light blue, but then turning black. "I can't tell you what pleasure it would give me," he said through gritted teeth, "to give him such a belt on his ugly mug." "Who?" asked Yelena, wrinkling her nose, onto which the tears were beginning to drip. "Myself," said Dr. Turbin, beside himself with shame, "for allowing myself to embrace him that time." Yelena burst into tears. "Do me a favour, will you?" he continued. "Send that horrible object there to the devil," he said, jabbing at the photograph on the table with the handle of his stick. Sobbing, Yelena handed the photograph to him. In a flash, he had pulled the photograph of Sergei Ivanovich from its frame and ripped it into pieces. Yelena started howling like a peasant woman, her shoulders shaking as she pressed herself into Alexei's starched shirt front. Out of the corner of her eye, she looked with a sense of superstitious terror at the brown icon, in front of which the lamp in its gold holder was still burning. "Yes, I prayed to you, and I know I set conditions. Well, please don't be angry with me. Don't be angry, Holy Mother of God," thought the superstitious Yelena. Alexei became alarmed. "Shh, not so loud. They'll hear you, and that wouldn't help." But no one in the sitting room had heard anything. Nikolka had just finished crashing out the Two-Headed Eagle march on the piano, and everyone was laughing. Chapter 20. Great and terrible was the year of our Lord 1918, but the year 1919 was still more terrible. On the night of the 2nd of February, at the entrance to the chain bridge across the river Dnieper, 2 men were dragging someone across the snow in a black, torn overcoat, his blood-stained face covered in bruises. Beside them ran a Cossack sergeant, hitting him over the head with a ramrod. At every blow, the blood-stained man's head jerked back, but he had stopped yelling and was now simply moaning. As the ramrod lashed with considerable force into the torn overcoat, the man would respond to every blow with an "Uff! Ah!" "You Yiddish bastard!" the sergeant yelled, incensed with fury. "You're going to be taken to those stacks and shot! I'll teach you to skulk about the place! I'll teach you! What were you doing hiding behind those stacks, you spy?" But the blood-stained man did not answer the enraged sergeant. Then the sergeant ran a little way in front, and the 2 others jumped aside to avoid the swish of the descending, glittering rod. Without calculating the strength of the blow, the sergeant smashed the rod into the man's head with the force of a lightning bolt. Something cracked, and this time there was no response from the man. His head lolled back, and thrusting out one arm, he slumped over from his knees to one side, and with a wide sweep he flung his other arm back, as if he wanted to scoop up as much as possible of the trampled and dung-covered ground around him. His fingers formed into a crook,
and he started scrabbling at the dirty snow. Then he just lay there in a dark puddle, twitching several times, and finally went still. Above the victim at the entrance to the bridge, an electric lamp hissed, and all around him scuttled the frightened shadows of Cossacks with their tasselled caps. Above was the black vault of the sky, shining with a myriad of twinkling stars. And at the very moment that the man lying on the ground died, the star of Mars in the frozen heights above the outskirts of the city suddenly exploded with a deafening roar, spattering fire. And following the star, the black distances on the far bank of the Dnieper leading to far-off Moscow also erupted in a prolonged, heavy crash of thunder. And then a second star exploded, but this time lower down, right above the roofs of the houses buried under the snow. And immediately the blue Haidamach division set off from the bridge and trotted into the city, continuing through the city and out of sight forever. Behind them raced the frozen horses of Kozyelyeshka's unit like a pack of wolves, followed by a bouncing field kitchen. Then the entrance to the bridge was empty, as if nobody had been there. Only the congealing corpse of the black-coated Jew remained, together with the trampled mounds of snow and the piles of horse dung. And the corpse was the only witness to the fact that Petura had not been just a myth, that he really had been there. Ring, clang, the guitar and the Turk, the metal lamp on Bronaya, girls' plats, whirling snow, gunshot wounds, wolves howling at night time, the frost. Yes, it had all really happened. Look, there's Grisha. He's off to work. But his boots are torn. He's gone berserk. But why had it happened? What was it all for? Nobody can tell. But will anyone pay for all the bloodshed? No. No one. The snow will simply thaw. The green Ukrainian grass will spring up and plat the earth. The fresh, lush shoots will sprout, and the heat will shimmer over the fields. But of all that blood, not a trace will remain. Blood is cheap in those dark red fields, and no one will ever pay for it. No one. Since the early evening, the tiles on the Sardam stove had glowed with heat, and all the stoves had been kept warm until deep into the night. All the inscriptions on the shipwright of Sardam had been washed off, except for the remains of one. Len, have a ticket for Aid. The house on St. Alexei's hill, the house crowned by its general's cap of snow, had long since been wrapped in a warm sleep. Dreams flitted among the curtains and flickered in the shadows. Outside, the frozen night became more and more dominant as it floated over the earth. The stars danced, shrinking and expanding, and especially high in the sky was the red five-pointed star of Mars. Alexei slept in his bedroom, his dream hovering above him like an indistinct painting. The hallway floated by, swaying as it went, and the Emperor Alexander I was setting light to the battalion papers in the stove. Yulia went by, beckoning to him and laughing. Shadows flitted past, and people shouted, "Grab him! Grab him!" There were people firing at him soundlessly, and he was trying to run away from them, but his feet stuck to the pavement on Maloprovalnaya Street, and Alexei died in his sleep. He woke up with a groan and heard Myshlayevsky snoring in the sitting room, and the gentle whistle of Karas's and Lariosik's breathing from the library. Becoming fully awake, he wiped the sweat from his brow, smiling to himself as he reached out for his watch. It said 3 o'clock. They must have gone by now. Petura, too, and he'll never come back. And then he fell asleep again. The night blossomed as it moved towards morning. The house slept on, buried under its shaggy mantle of snow. Tossing and turning, Vasilisa slept in the cold sheets, warming them with his emaciated body. He was having an absurd, circular dream. In the dream, it was as if there hadn't been any revolution at all. It had all been nonsensical rubbish. A vague, indeterminate feeling of happiness washed over him. And then, in his dream, it was summer, and he had just bought an allotment in which vegetables sprang up instantaneously. The beds were full of cheerful little green shoots, through which cucumbers peeked out like little figs. Vasilisa stood there in a pair of canvas trousers, scratching his stomach and watching the enchanting sunset. Then he dreamt of his globe-shaped clock that had been stolen from him. He wanted to feel sad because of the clock, but the sun was shining so pleasantly that he was unable to feel sad. And then, at this precise moment, when everything was so pleasant, several round pink piglets flew into the allotment and immediately started rooting up the vegetable beds with their little round snouts. The earth spewed up into the air like fountains. Vasilisa picked up a stick from the ground and prepared to chase the piglets away, but they suddenly turned into fearsome-looking animals with sharp fangs. They rushed towards him, jumping several feet into the air as they did so, because they had springs inside them. Vasilisa howled with terror in his sleep. Then a huge black doorpost crashed down on the piglets, and they disappeared into the ground. And Vasilisa emerged from his dream to find himself in his damp, dark bedroom. The night continued to blossom. The spirit of sleep flew on over the city like some nebulous white bird, passing by the cross of St. Vladimir until it reached the other side of the river Dnieper, where, at the very dead of night, it floated along the railway track. When it reached Darnitsa, it stopped and began hovering above the station. On track number 3, an armoured train stood waiting. The grey gun platforms were armour-plated right down to the wheels. The locomotive loomed up into the sky in a dark mass of multifaceted metal, red-hot fire spilling out from its belly onto the rails, so that from the side it looked as if its womb was overflowing with incandescent coals. It was quietly and ominously hissing away to itself. Something was oozing from its sides, and its blunt snout was silently pointed at the forests lying along the bank of the Dnieper. On the last gun platform, a broad muzzle wrapped in a cover pointed up into the blue-black sky, aimed directly at the midnight cross, some 8 miles away. The station was frozen in horror. It moved into the darkness head-on, and it shone with the eyes of little yellow lights still reeling from the thunder of the evening's events. Despite the late hour, its platforms were bustling with people. There were 3 bright lights showing in the small yellow telegraph building, and through the windows the constant clatter of telegraph machines could be heard. Despite the biting frost, the figures of people wrapped up in fur coats down to their knees, in greatcoats and black jackets, ran up and down the platform. On a side track behind the armoured train, a troop train waited patiently, its carriage doors slamming with a resounding echo. By the locomotive of the armoured train and the metal sides of the first armoured car, a man in a long greatcoat, tattered felt boots, and a sharp-pointed domed hat was patrolling back and forth like a pendulum. He held his rifle in his hands tenderly, as if he were a tired mother cradling a baby. In the dim lamplight, the sharp black outline of a soundless bayonet kept pace with him as he moved up and down between the rails. The man was extremely tired and frozen to the bone. The wooden fingers of his blue, cold hands dug around in vain, seeking shelter in the torn sleeves of his coat. His eyes stared out from under snow-covered eyelashes, and the ragged white fringe of his hood framing his mouth encrusted with frost. His languorous, light blue eyes were glazed with suffering and lack of sleep. The man walked up and down methodically, his bayonet lowered, thinking only about one thing: how soon his hour of frozen torture could end, and he would be able to leave this brutal cold behind and go inside, into the heavenly warmth of the carriage and its hissing pipes, and into the crowded space of his compartment, where he could flop onto his narrow bunk and sprawl out, sticking to it like glue. Up and down the man's shadow moved, from the fiery glow of the armoured locomotive belly to the dark side of the first armoured car, until he reached the black sign saying, "Armored Train Proletarian." Now increasing in size, now hunching up like some hideous monster, but always retaining its sharply pointed tip, the shadow carved its way through the snow with its black bayonet. Behind him, the blue lights of the lamps hung in the air. On the platform, there were 2 blue moons that teased rather than warmed. The man looked everywhere for a fire, but without success. Clenching his teeth and abandoning any hope of ever warming his toes by simply wiggling them around, he fixed his gaze on the stars. The easiest star for him to look at was Mars, shining in the sky above the edge of the city. And as he looked upwards, his eyes encompassing distances of millions and millions of miles, he never for an instant let the vibrant red star out of his sight. It was 5-pointed and clearly alive as it expanded and contracted. At times, overcome by exhaustion, the man stopped and lowered the butt of his rifle onto the snowy ground and, within the space of a moment, fell transparently asleep. Yet although he was asleep, the black wall of the armoured train and the sounds of the station remained with him as he slept. But they were joined by other sounds, and the vault of the sky expanded into something vast, sparkling and glittering with an abundance of vibrant red stars. His heart instantly flooded with happiness. Then a strange unknown man in chainmail appeared on horseback and floated up towards him in a friendly sort of way. The black armoured train was on the verge of disappearing from his dream, it seemed, to be replaced by a village buried deep in snow, the village of Malye Chugri. The man was standing on the edge of the village, and the other man, the one on horseback coming towards him, was his fellow villager and neighbour. "Jilin?" the man's brain asked silently, without using his lips. And immediately he heard the grim voice of the guard hammering away inside him, with the words, "Sentry, post, you'll freeze to death." With a totally superhuman effort, the man grabbed his rifle, slung it on his arm, and staggered on his way again, struggling through the snow. Back and forth, back and forth. The vast, glittering, sleepy vault disappeared, and the frozen world was once more clothed in the familiar blue, silky sky, pierced by the black, sinister shape of a gun barrel. Reddish Venus twinkled, and from time to time the star on the man's chest would reflect the light coming from the blue moon of the station lamp. This star was small, and also 5-pointed. The spirit of sleep spun uneasily around as it flew along the river Dnieper, passing over the lifeless jetties and dropping down over Podol, where the lights had long since gone out. Everyone was asleep. Only in a 3-story stone building on the corner of Valinskaya Street, in the librarian's apartment, a room that was as narrow and as cramped as the cheapest room in the cheapest hotel, the blue-eyed Rusakov sat by a lamp with a humpbacked glass shade. In front of him lay a hefty book in a yellow leather binding. His eyes were moving slowly and solemnly across the lines, "And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged according to their works. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea." The more he read this extraordinary book, the more his mind became like a shining sword, piercing the darkness. Disease and suffering now appeared unimportant to him, lacking all substance. His illness fell away like the scabby bark from a forgotten tree that has been felled in the forest. He saw the blue, bottomless mist of the centuries, the endless corridor of the millennia. And instead of fear, he felt awe and the wisdom of submissiveness. He felt at peace, and it was in this state of peace that he arrived at the words, tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away." The dense fog lifted, and Lieutenant Chervinsky appeared to Yelena. His prominent eyes had a knowing smile. "I am a demon," he said, clicking his heels, "but Talberg's not coming back to you, so I'm going to sing to you." And he drew out of his pocket an enormous tinsel star and pinned it onto her left breast. The fog of sleep swirled around him, and through the clouds his face appeared like that of a brightly painted doll. He started to sing piercingly, not in his normal real-life voice. "We shall live, we shall live, but death will come, and we shall die," sang Nikolka, coming into the room. He had a guitar in his hands, but his neck was covered in blood, and a yellow wreath with little icons hung round his forehead. Yelena's immediate thought was that he was going to die, and she burst out sobbing. Then, in the middle of the night, she woke up, shouting, "Nikolka! Oh, Nikolka!" And she lay there for a long time, sobbing, listening to the murmuring of the night. And the night floated on. And finally, young Pyetka Shcheglov, from the annex next door to the Turbins, had a dream. Pyetka was a little boy, and therefore he was not interested in the Bolsheviks, or Petliura, or the devil, and he dreamt a dream that was as simple and as joyful as the sun itself. He dreamt he was walking along a large green meadow, on which there was a glittering diamond globe, larger than Pyetka. Whenever adults try to run in their dreams, they find that their feet stick to the ground. They groan and thrash about, attempting to free themselves from the swamp-like ground. Children's feet, on the other hand, are skittish and free. Pyetka ran up to the diamond globe and, laughing and catching his breath from happiness, grasped it with both hands. The globe showered Pyetka with sparkling droplets. That was the whole of his dream. He burst out laughing from happiness in the middle of the night, and from somewhere behind the stove a cricket joined in, chirping happily. Pyetka began to dream other dreams, all of them joyful and simple, and the cricket sang and sang in reply from its hiding place in a crack in the wall behind the bucket, bringing the sleepy, murmuring family night to life. The final night flowed on. During its second half, the entire blue, heavy vault of the sky, God's curtain cradling the earth, was a mass of stars. So many stars that it seemed as if in the infinity lying beyond this blue curtain, an all-night mass were being celebrated in front of the royal gates of a cathedral. The lights had been lit on the altar, and they had started shining through the curtain in the form of crosses, clusters, and squares. Above the river Dnieper, and above the sinful, blood-stained and snow-covered earth, loomed the dark, sombre mass of the midnight cross of St. Vladimir. From a distance, it seemed as if the crosspiece had merged with the vertical and had disappeared, transforming the cross into a sharp, threatening sword. But it is not to be feared. Everything will pass. Suffering, torment, blood, hunger, and plague. The sword will disappear, but the stars will remain when even the shadows of our bodies and of our deeds no longer remain on this earth. There is not a single person who does not know this. Why then do we not wish to direct our gaze towards them? Why? Moscow, 1923–24. Introduction to The White Guard by Roger Cockrell. It is an evening in mid-December. The tiles of the Dutch stove are blazing with heat, and the outside world lies concealed behind cream-coloured curtains. On the table, with its starched white tablecloth and vase of slightly faded flowers, stand plates of food and bottles of vodka. In one corner of the room, there is a piano with an opera score lying open. One of those present, the youngest of the family, the 17-year-old Nikolka, is strumming quietly on a guitar. The others, including Nikolka's brother and sister, Alexei and Yelena, are sitting round the table, engaged in animated conversation. Every so often a fierce argument breaks out, only to dissolve in banter and laughter. The room is bathed in the pink glow of the lamplight, filtering through the cigarette smoke. Next door there is a library lined with books and journals in many languages, evidence of a rich cultural heritage. This is Bulgakov's portrayal, in his novel The White Guard, of the Turbin family at home, seemingly secure in their first-floor apartment and striving to recreate, now that Alexei has returned from military service, the environment of cosy domesticity that they have all known since early childhood. It is an apparently timeless and strangely innocent picture. Yet time and history have caught up with the Turbins, threatening to destroy not only them, but an entire culture and way of life. For at the point the novel opens, a week or so before Christmas in the terrible year of 1918, the world beyond the cream-coloured curtains has become fractured, fraught with menace and confusion. The immediate environs are relatively quiet, with only the occasional sledge swishing along the street on which the Turbins live. But the wider city, with its shops, bars, clubs and schools that are all so familiar to them, stands on the edge of an abyss. The White Guard, written for the most part in the early 1920s, but remaining unpublished in full in Soviet Russia until 1966, is set in Bulgakov's native city, the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. The narrative spans a period of less than 2 months during the exceptionally harsh winter of 1918-19. With the withdrawal of German troops from Kiev after Germany's defeat on the Western Front in November, and the consequential abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the situation of the Ukrainian puppet government under its hetman, Pavlo Skoropadsky, has become untenable. Now, in December, the city is under attack by the forces of the Ukrainian nationalist Simon Petlura, resisted only by scattered and disorganized units of officers and cadets, including the Turbin brothers and a group of their close friends, the White Guard of the title. Everyday life for the city's population has deteriorated, with circumstances suddenly becoming frighteningly arbitrary and fragile. Although their lives are to be profoundly affected by these events, the Turbin family remains at the still centre of this whirlpool throughout the novel. Despite their differences in character, behaviour and temperament, the three of them, together with their close circle of friends, are united by their love for pre-revolutionary Russia, the Tsar and autocracy, and by their anti-Ukrainian sentiments embodied in their hatred for Petlura. Their most vitriolic contempt, however, is reserved for the treacherous behaviour of the hetman and the general staff officers, including Yelena Turbin's husband, Sergei Talberg, who abandon their posts and flee to Germany. Meanwhile, waiting in the wings for the opportunity to strike are the grey hordes of the Bolsheviks under Trotsky. The story that Bulgakov tells is a largely authentic reconstruction of these historical events. Many of the details relating to the setting and the characters, furthermore, possess a strongly autobiographical element, an evocation of Bulgakov's own family circumstances. Yet his use throughout of the term the city to refer to Kiev reminds us that the White Guard is primarily neither autobiography nor history, but a visionary novel springing from a highly original and creative imagination. As in his short story The Fatal Eggs, 1925, the last of Bulgakov's prose works to be published during his lifetime, facts jostle with fiction to portray an alternative universe that diverges from historical reality in seemingly random and therefore unsettling ways. The novel's essentially fictional quality is further emphasized by its abundance of literary allusions, both direct and indirect. Among the most resonant and pervasive of these are the allusions to Tolstoy's War and Peace, the two novels sharing a central theme, the contrast between the concerns of the individual and the family on the one hand, and wide-reaching and destructive historical events on the other. The parallel can be extended to include at least some of the characters. Alexei Turbin, for example, has much in common with Tolstoy's equally sceptical and world-weary Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, and his younger brother Nikolka shares a number of attributes with Pietra Rostov. Both are guileless, impulsive young men, and both idealize war, anticipating a glorious and heroic death in battle. Until, that is, they come face to face with its reality. Additionally, there is more than an echo in The White Guard of Tolstoy's derisive attack on the pomposity and hubris of so-called great men, the generals and politicians who imagine that they are able to shape the course of historical events. In reality, however, they are merely puppets, their decisions shaped by forces of which they are unaware and which they are unable to control. Whereas Tolstoy tells his story rationally and lucidly, Bulgakov's narrative unfolds far less evenly. Episodes of family life intersperse with accounts of military action, punctuated by songs, poems, dreams, fragments of thoughts, swirling rumours, and snatches of conversation, often of uncertain provenance. The novel's first epigraph, a quotation from Alexander Pushkin's historical novel The Captain's Daughter, describing the onset of a disastrous blizzard, plunges us into a world of darkness and elemental chaos, a world in which people's minds become unhinged and the usual social norms governing human behaviour no longer operate. Suffering and tragedy are portrayed on both an individual and a grand scale, with scenes depicting barbaric acts of primitive savagery perpetrated by members of Petliura's armed forces and frequently motivated by the crudest kind of anti-Semitism. The second epigraph, taken from the Book of Revelation, anticipates the apocalyptic theme that manifests itself in various ways throughout the work, including references to the Bolshevik leader Trotsky as the Antichrist, with his armies characterized as legions of the devil. Here Bulgakov's world intersects most closely with that of Dostoevsky. It is not by chance that the book languishing open at the foot of Alexei's bed is Dostoevsky's most apocalyptic novel, The Devils. Despite the undoubted bleakness of much of The White Guard, this is not the whole story. We note that the red, quivering Mars of the opening paragraph is counterbalanced by Venus, the goddess of love. Through the Turbin family, we are made aware of the resilience of the human spirit and of the virtues of loyalty and steadfastness of principle, qualities that are thrown into strong relief when contrasted with the self-serving banalities of their landlord, Vasily Salisevich, skulking with his wife Vanda in the apartment immediately below the Turbins. Although, with the arrival of the Bolsheviks in the city at the end of the novel, the Turbins' eventual fate remains as uncertain as ever, one of the final scenes shows them at home together, laughing and singing. And in the penultimate paragraph, we see young Petya Shcheglov from the neighbouring family, uninterested, we are told, in the Bolsheviks or Petlura or the devil, and dreaming he is walking across a large green meadow towards a glittering diamond globe that showers him with coloured lights when he reaches it. He bursts out laughing from happiness. In the light of Father Alexander's injunction to Alexei that despair is forbidden, such scenes acquire a particular significance. But the novel's clearly religious dimension is not confined to the need for optimism. Every so often, the veil of fog and despair lifts to reveal a providential and mysteriously interconnected universe in which the course of people's lives can be shaped by the apparently miraculous rather than the logic of brutal reality. Nikolka somehow manages to escape from an impossible situation. Alexei is rescued, quite out of the blue, by a total stranger who unselfishly acts to help save his life, and he is later resurrected from the dead through, we are led to believe, the intercession of Yelena with her impassioned prayer to the Virgin Mary. Both brothers are linked, in circumstances that transcend the merely coincidental, by the labyrinth of houses and the white, fairy-tale terraced garden on Maloprovalnaya Street. It is here that Alexei finds Yulia, and that Nikolka meets the sister of his idol, the heroic Colonel Naitours, whose horrific death he has witnessed, and whose body he has helped to bury. There is an unexpected final twist. Bulgakov directs his reader's attention away from purely earthbound concerns, away even from the city, with its abundance of beautiful parks and gardens, and the mighty river Dnieper, overlooked by the towering statue of Saint Vladimir and its gigantic illuminated cross. The novel concludes, as it began, with an image of the night sky. Since, as Bulgakov assures us, nothing will remain of value other than the stars, why then do we stubbornly continue to ignore their existence? This final paragraph is no mere rhetorical flourish, for it forces us to consider an aspect of the novel that has been present throughout. Bulgakov's implied criticism of the blinkered lives that the Turbins lead. How far, however, is such criticism counterbalanced by Bulgakov's sympathy for a family and a way of life that was so close to his own heart? As in the conclusion to Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, in which there is a similar tension between conflicting emotions, we cannot be certain on which side Bulgakov intended to tip the scales. Whatever we may decide, the fact remains: if people choose to live behind cream-coloured curtains, they may be able, at least for the time being, to shut themselves away from the outside world, but they will certainly deny themselves the opportunity to see the stars.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.